If you clicked on this video looking for Final Fantasy II for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, this is not a video for that game. This video is a review of Final Fantasy II for the Family Computer released in Japan in 1988. For those who don't know, 3 of the original 6 Final Fantasy games never made it to the United States in their original forms. There are 3 games for the FamiCom and Nintendo Entertainment System family, and 3 more games for the SNES. The only 3 of these games to make it to the United States are Final Fantasy I, 4, and 6. In order to keep continuity in the States, these games were given different names in the States as opposed to their true canonical order. Final Fantasy I is unchanged, Final Fantasy IV was renamed to Final Fantasy II, and Final Fantasy VI was renamed to Final Fantasy III. In this video, I will be playing the 1998 Neo Demi-Force translation of the Famicom version of Final Fantasy II. There are remastered versions of this game that exist in English, but I prefer to play these games in their original format, bugs and all. To clarify, I'm not playing the original simply to make content off of unfixed bugs and exploits. I like originals because they are best suited for the original effort and enthusiasm behind a game, whereas remasters and remakes may lose some of those special details as they drift further from the game's original purpose. In a far-off land, a long peace has ended. The Paramekian Empire has summoned Hellspawn and hopes to rule the world. The people of Phin fought bravely for their kingdom, and lost. Now 4 of Phin's youth must flee to Altea, with the enemy just behind. Final Fantasy II sets a grim tone before it even starts. Hot off the heels of Final Fantasy I, I was already excited to begin, and I was surprised by the beginning of the story. Instead of a wonderful journey through unexplored lands filled with glory and camaraderie, you're running for your life. After the title scroll comes the file select, which can carry up to 4 saved games at a time. Along with the files is a little box with New Game and Speed inside as options. New Game is self-explanatory, and the Speed option controls how fast text boxes will appear or disappear in battle. 1 is the slowest speed, and 8 is the fastest. I used a speed of 7 during my playthrough. Then it's time to name your characters. There are actual names for these characters as per the story, but it's still up to you if you want to name them something different. The first character's name is Firion, then Maria, then Guy, and then Leon. You have 6 letters to work with when naming the characters. There are more characters in the story that you do not have the option to name, but you'll get to those as they appear in the story. My question is, how were you supposed to know the names of the characters before you start the game? It's not a loss if you don't, but it's still part of the story. Once you press New Game, you are immediately launched into a battle. There really isn't any messing around. The only option you have is to either run or fight, so select either or. Then, your characters heroically step up to defend themselves from the horseback riding demons and... So, the first thing you do in Final Fantasy II is game over. After being mortally wounded by the horseback riders, you find yourself in a white brick room with a woman and a man standing over you. The woman's name is Hilda, and she had rescued you from the riders while on her way out of Phin. The man's name is different around translations, but I'm going to call him Min simply because that's what his name is in the translation that I played. He revives you, and then the 2 head off. Firion wakes up and calls out for his friends before finding them outside. Guy and Maria are waiting for him, and Firion asks where Leon is. Guy says that Leon has not been found yet. Yeah, I mean, those riders did a little bit of damage, just a little bit, when they knocked the party down, so he's fine. Hilda is waiting for you in the northern room. She gives you permission to stay in the town you recovered in and provides you with a password for the rebel army. In giving you the password, you're introduced to the NPC dialogue system in Final Fantasy II. This will be a reoccurring mechanic critical to the game. I also am not sure if this system is exclusive to this game, but it might be. A character will say something to you, and in certain cases where their dialogue is important, there will be a little tone that plays along with one of the words being encased in brackets. When this happens, you need to choose the Learn option to commit the word to memory. Now that you have a keyword, you can use it with certain NPCs and objects to cause events to happen or for the NPC to say different things. Hilda tells you to try it with all the NPCs in the Rebel Army base, though there are only a couple you can use it with. You'll collect plenty more keywords as the game progresses, as well as key items which also trigger events and special dialogue options. I think that this system had good intent. You no longer have to keep notes of what NPCs say in certain places, as you'll be given plenty of options, all conveniently kept in the game for you. That, and it somewhat keeps you tied to the current quest to progress the game. It's not so bad. Unfortunately, this keyword system is subject to two major flaws. Firstly, if you don't know what to say to someone, you need to try basically every keyword and every item on them until you get the right one. That, or if you don't have the right keyword because you perhaps missed it during a dialogue sequence or didn't talk to the right person to learn it. And secondly, the way that the keyword system is used is still dependent on your memory of where those words are important. It's easy to remember the small amounts of characters, but there are also solid blocks that require keywords in very specific places which are usually out of your way or not well indicated. Overall, the sentiment is good, but the implementation is mediocre. Moving on, make sure to get some directions from the characters in Hilda's throne room. Min instructs you to first go to Phin, which is to the north. There is also a town across the lake to the east called Palm, and a kingdom further east called Kashuon. But you don't need to worry about these places yet. First, check out the town where the rebel base is located. This is the first town of the game, and it's very beneficial if you memorize the layout because you'll be back here a lot. There are shops here that sell armor and weapons that you can buy from, but all your characters have been equipped with the gear you could have bought from these stores. The item shop has 3 cashiers that all sell different things, especially some items which found their origin in this game. Potions restore your health, antidotes remove poison, eye drops remove blindness, crucifixes remove curses, echo screens cure sleep, maiden's kisses cure the toad status, gold needles cure petrification, phoenix down revives members, ether restores magic points, cottages refill health and magic on the map, and elixirs restore magic and health to full. Some of these items are vastly more expensive than one another, but don't worry about that. You won't need the super expensive items just yet, and you'll find some in chests later. Either way, if you get hurt outside of town, you can use the inn. The inn in Final Fantasy II requires you to pay an amount based on how injured your characters are. If your characters are hurt or missing a lot of magic points, the cost of the inn goes up. If you're in tip-top shape, the cost of the inn will be minimal. This also does matter how powerful you are. It's based on the amount of health or magic you're missing, and not a percentage. The more health points you have, the more injured you could be, and the more money you'll need to pay off the inn. And to top it off, you will have a really hard time coming by some gil in the beginning here. There are also magic stores. The magic stores sell spell tomes, which can be given to any one of your characters for them to learn that spell. The spell tomes can also be used in battle as an item, and it will cast a high-level version of its spell before disappearing from your inventory. Each character can learn up to 16 different spells. The last structure, besides village houses, is the church. This building doesn't have a sign above it, making it indistinguishable from the other houses, but when you go inside, it's much more spacious than the other houses. There is a single statue at the far end of the room. Talking to this statue will restore any of your defeated characters to life with a single health point. The church's services are completely free, but then if you can't heal that character afterwards, you'll end up paying a fortune at the inn anyway. At least, if your character is missing a lot of health. The townspeople walking around are sometimes important and sometimes not. The ones that are connected to the story will pull up the keyword box for you to interact with them, and the rest may simply give you tidbits of information. The NPC north of the Rebel Army headquarters, named Gordon, was mentioned in the dialogue inside of the Rebel HQ and will be important later. Your one goal right now is to head out of town and observe what became of the conquered Phin. The screen quickly meets in the center, and you are presented with the Final Fantasy II overworld. I believe drifting is the correct word for the emotion of the overworld music. It's oddly melancholy. Sometimes you may notice an airship pass by. Before we get into the world though, let's talk about the menu. When you press start, you bring up the character menu. The character cards shown display each of your character's health and magic as well as their names and portrait. Below the character cards are 5 options: item, magic, equip, stats, and save. The item option brings up your inventory where you can access up to 32 different items. The magic option for each character allows you to use some spells while in your menu. Equip brings you to the equipment menu for each separate character with 7 slots for gear. The stats menu shows a character's attributes including intelligence, vitality, agility, and so on. Finally, save is self-explanatory. You can choose one of your files to save your game. You can sort any of the items in your inventory, use them, or throw them out. Certain items can't be thrown out, and inventory space is shared between items, key items, and unequipped gear. You can equip 3 pieces of armor, 2 weapons, and 2 items to each character. Bear in mind that the only items you can use in battle are the ones that you equip to a character's item slot. Phin is to the north, so it's time to take a hike up there. On the way, you'll run into hornets and snakes. When you do, you'll be presented with the Final Fantasy II combat system. In any battle, the biome border will first materialize on top of the screen before your adversaries appear on the left side. Then, your characters will walk into the screen on the right side before the text boxes containing your health, magic, character names, and enemy names appear. You are given 4 options: to fight, run, use magic, or use an item. Choosing fight allows you to pick an enemy and inflict physical damage. Run causes all 4 of your characters, on account of the character that you chose this option for, to attempt to get away from the battle. Magic lets you use spells you applied to your characters via spell tomes. Finally, items allow you to access the weapons equipped to your hands, as well as the items you may have equipped in your item slots. When you choose for a character, that character will step forwards on the screen. Once you have selected, the character will step back and the next character in line will walk up. When you have selected an action for all your characters, they and their enemies will commit to their action based on a turn order decided by the agility of each character or enemy. You can also select an action for multiple targets. If you want to hit multiple enemies with a magic spell, cycle through them until the target indicator flashes between them. This also works for spells on your team. Party order in Final Fantasy II cannot be changed. If you press select on the world map, you can instead move a character to the back row during a fight. This back row character will be limited physically, with some weapons unable to hit enemies at all, but they will take far less physical damage. It's a perfect place for your mage. The enemies are also capable of putting themselves in the back row. Something to get used to while playing Final Fantasy II is how enemies arrange themselves, as well as how you must prioritize your attacks for every battle. You can only physically attack 2 rows deep into an enemy setup, the row directly in front of you and the row behind that. The rest of the enemies can either be targeted with magic attacks or will remain untouched until the first enemies are beaten. You may have noticed that there are a myriad of weapons for your characters to use. The great thing is that any character can learn to use any weapon. Any character can also equip any sort of armor. There are no limitations to how you wish to build your team. However, there are limitations to how you need to build your team. Something you may have noticed when looking at the stat screen is that your party strength in Final Fantasy II is not based on leveling up. Experience points in this game work quite a bit differently. I think the best characterization for this system is the saying, "Practice makes perfect." Any stat that you can think of in Final Fantasy II is increased by actual experience and not experience points. That means that if you want to get better at using a weapon, you need to use the weapon. If you want more health, you need to get hit. If you want more magic, you need to use magic. On its surface, I'm sure it sounds fine. In fact, it sounds more realistic than the normal experience point system. However, there are a few parts of this system which tank its quality badly. I don't think that these bad parts soil the overall usability of combat, just that they make it toilsome and unfun. First, about the stat increases. Not all of them are guaranteed. In fact, most of the stat increases are conditional and luck-based. In order to get an increase to your health, you first need to lose at least 1/8 of your health during a battle to have a chance of gaining more. The more health you lose in a battle, the better chance for you to gain a bit more on your maximum afterwards. The same goes for magic points. First lose 1/8, then increase your chances by losing more. So that's easy enough to understand. What about another attribute, such as defense? Defense actually doesn't change at all. It is entirely dependent on what equipment you wear. How about speed? Does that increase if you run away more? No. Whether you gain speed or not is completely dependent on luck. If an enemy targets a character during a battle, then that character will have a chance to gain agility. How about attack power and magic power? Well, those are based on how many times you attack or cast per battle. Physical attacks, white magic, and black magic are all separately leveled based on how you approach your battle. If you attack with weapons, then your attack power will increase. If you attack with magic, your intelligence, which influences black magic, will increase. And if you heal or cure during a battle, your soul, which influences white magic, will increase. There is a separate stat that measures how many times you can hit an enemy and how powerful your spells can be. These stats are entirely dependent on usage. If you fight with a weapon, you will gain a couple skill points every time you attack in battle. 100 skill points means you level up your weapon and are now able to hit your enemies one more time, assuming you're lucky, of course. Magic spells work the same way, though not all of the spells scale evenly. The weird thing is that not every character stat is based on fighting alone. There are also some separate stats which influence the growth of the battle stats based on your equipment. You would think that shields would influence defense somehow, but that's not true. Shields increase physical attack power and also help your characters level agility and evasion. So in the end, some of your stats level up based on luck, and some of them are based on usage. It's a great idea. I say, however, that this combat system has run into some extremely serious contradictions. I'll start with the biggest one, flexibility. The beginning of this combat system makes your character setup seem flexible because any one of your characters can use any weapon, wear any armor, or use any magic. As I said before, as your characters use these skills, they will get stronger. The key here, though, is that your characters are using those skills and not any other skills. As you delve deeper and deeper into the game, your singularly used skills will become incredibly powerful. But, suppose that you want to change weapons for a character in order to use a weapon that has some elemental effect, for example. Well, now you have to level up your character's weapon so that it can fight at the same level as your previous veteran skill. This doesn't sound so bad, but the fact is that these skills have taken however long you've been playing to get leveled up this far. That means that you have to fight as many enemies as you fought with your previous weapon just to get it up to par. And no, if it was just grinding, I wouldn't be complaining as much. I can suffer the patience game. There is more to this. Now you might be thinking, why can't I just level my characters with everything, and create a strategy where all characters know some key spells and have high magic power, physical power, etc. But you can't, because of one of my greatest gripes with this game. You can lose stats. Like, a lot. If you choose to rely on physical power to fight your enemies, then good luck trying to use black magic, because for every battle where you rely on brute force, there is a chance you will lose intelligence. That is the only stat loss that I can understand. It's also possible to lose soul points, meaning you weakly heal anyone as well, regardless of magic level. So, if this system is trying to replicate a real situation where you would be fighting on the front lines, maybe you would get dumber if you get hit a whole bunch, right? So I don't understand why the other stats decrease. It's like the game gives you the chance to be flexible, then punishes you when you try to change. No matter which way you look at it, you'll be leading a team of one-trick ponies into the final dungeon. And I get it, that doesn't sound too horrible, but the enemies that late into the game have multiple functions which can devastate your characters if they're not set up right. Final Fantasy II requires a lot of time spent just training to meet a bar. Even speedruns of this game rely solely on a single skill. You better hope that your team is balanced. The second downfall is grinding time. Now, there are two caveats to this downfall. Grinding can become monotonous since you'll be stuck in one battle for maybe 10 minutes or more, not to mention that you can't choose to waste turns, so you need to parse out your moves carefully to maximize stat gains. So I present you with the evolution of my stat grinding, which includes far more technical information I found as I played. Most of these grinding strategies revolve around gaining more health, though I have recommendations for other stats. So in order to lose health, you have to get hit. Well, the best thing you can do is leave as many enemies alive as possible so they can attack you. However, it is impossible to waste turns unless you have a magic item, which you probably won't until halfway through the game, so you'll still be systematically taking out the enemies one by one until nothing else is left to get your health down. It is possible to waste a couple turns by having the entire party target a single enemy. If a character attacks an enemy that has already been defeated, then their attack will be voided entirely and move on to the next character. You can also waste turns by casting spells on your party such as Cure. However, the maximum health increase is judged by the fraction of health you're missing at the end of the battle as compared to the start of the battle. Healing yourself will hurt your chance of gaining more health. Another problem with this strategy is that there is a big gap between the strength of enemies that may do minimal damage on the doorstep of Altea and extreme damage much further outside of town. As you gain health, you'll have to take many more hits just to reach the 1/8 quota for the lowest possible chance to gain health. So if getting targeted by enemies won't help, how am I supposed to lose health? Remember that you are able to cast any sort of spell on yourself. This also means that you can physically attack yourself. This is the first of two caveats with the grinding system. What better adversary to get hit by than yourself? You already do enough damage to almost knock one of your party members down in one blow. Not only that, but your physical damage output will also increase with the amount of damage that you do, so getting in plenty of damage on your characters will work as a self-sustaining cycle. You'll gain health, gain physical power, do enough damage to lower health near zero, then gain stats again. In this way, you can become grossly overpowered just fighting near easy enemies. Eventually, the enemies will be spectators to your infighting. There are two problems with this strategy. Enemies can run away from you and judge whether to flee based on the party's current collective health. You can't just use this strategy to push your health beyond out of reach, because eventually your enemies will just run away in the first turn. If they do, then you can't do enough damage to satisfy a stat increase, and you're essentially capped. The other problem is the cost of the inn. I said before that the cost of the inn depends on how much health and magic you're missing, and now with quite a lot more health, the inn demands a fortune. This is only a problem for this section of the game since the weaker enemies don't give you enough money. This strategy is still a bit fringe. It's entirely legitimate, but still fringe. Despite your accelerated health progress, your other stats are leveling up only as fast as you take turns. Is there any way to speed that process up? Well, in the FamiCom version of this game, there is. I think it's technically cheating, but it's not hard to do. Here's the second caveat to grinding. I guess this is technically an exploit of how your skill points are tracked, but it's still viable. Using this strategy, whenever you get into a fight, you won't have to take any turns at all. See, how the game tracks your skill gains isn't actually based on your actions during a turn. You may have noticed that the game lags a little bit after selecting an option for battle. The game does its calculations for your skill after you have finished selecting an action for your character, and not when you perform that action during battle. Using this fact, you can do the following. Step 1. Select an action corresponding to what stat you want your character to level. Step 2. Move on to the next character. Step 3. Push the B button until you're back to selecting for your first character. When you back out of an action, the skill point earned for the action is saved. If you continuously select and cancel an action for a character, you will receive the benefit of performing that action without ever causing the battle to progress. Note that your skills will not level up until the battle concludes, and any training done after a skill has reached a new level will not count until you finish either. Funnily enough, this strategy also helps with the luck-based stats. If you select and cancel the fight option over and over, the game will count all of the times for a power increase. Usually, a physical power increase is more likely based on how many physical attacks you do in a battle, but now you can guarantee it. This also works with magic casting. You will gain magic skill points to level up your spells and increase the chance that your intelligence or soul will level up during battle as well. I guess technically you could get your jack-of-all-trades characters this way, though you really don't need to. Plus, health and magic points are still dependent on real usage as they are calculated at the end of a battle. Speaking of, I'd like to talk about a third downfall of the combat system. The magic system for this game is heavily based on grinding. You can gain magic points depending on how much you use in battle, and your spells take a large amount of usage before they become more powerful. My problem with this system comes from the comparison between your magic points and your spell levels. Whenever you learn a spell, it is set to level 1 with 0 skill points. Usage of the spell can increase the skill points by 1 or 2 per use, and 100 skill points increases the level of the spell. The amount of magic points you use to cast the spell is the level of the spell. So, if I want to cast a level 5 cure spell, I need to use 5 magic points to cast the spell. The issue with this is that literally all of the spells get leveled up, even ones that you probably won't use in battle. I applaud the Final Fantasy II developers for this sort of creativity, though I seriously doubt there's anyone who would have used some of these spells in battle. You can use any magic in battle, including spells that warp you out of dungeons and other utility spells. Of course, as you level the spell from usage, it will cost more magic points, meaning that you have to use more magic to perform the same function outside of battle as the spell would have performed at its base level. Outside of battle, Warp 10 is the same as Warp 1, just that Warp 10 costs 10 times the amount of magic simply because you used it. And you might think, that's okay, maybe I'd get use out of a spell like that in battle. But really, there are specific spells that are much better than others, which render these utility spells completely useless in battle in their wake. Even the normal instant KO spell is Child's Play next to Toad, which can KO far more reliably. This applies to the battle system though, in that leveling up magic is far more painful than leveling up physical fighters. Since you're on a magic point budget, you can't freely work on your spell casting while in a dungeon with strong enemies that won't run away. You can level up your spells easily using the Dance Club method, but that won't increase your magic points. And worst of all, remember that increasing your magic points is still luck-based, just as health increases are. If you get rid of 1/8 of your magic points during a battle and miss the chance to get more maximum points, you're not getting those points back unless you paid for magic restoration items or go to an inn. The best strategy to get more magic points is to use the change spell that you will learn about halfway through the game. Okay, that's enough. This section of the video has mostly been me vexing and venting my frustrations that I ran into playing casually, though I don't know if others feel the same. Let's just put an objective number to my feelings. It took me 17 hours on the dot to complete Final Fantasy I. Including grinding time, Final Fantasy II took me 30 hours and 44 minutes. I'll leave that up to your discretion. So I have no idea how powerful I have to be to get to this place. The enemies around here aren't that tough, so if I just walk to the north, I suppose that I can get there. There is a quick stop to make before making it to Phin, in a small but essential town across the lake. Gatea is situationally useful. The armor and weapons here don't really help much, but at least there's an inn. The people are afraid that the Empire will come to conquer them after crossing the lake, but you don't care because you're crossing the lake anyway. Phin is surrounded by a crescent moon-shaped lake that you have to walk around. Do not, under any circumstance, wander off of the circumference of the crescent. You may meet some nice friends if you happen to stray too far. That wasn't so bad, was it? Phin is right here, and you'll need to slip in to avoid the Paramekian troops. Well, this place seems lively for a recently conquered kingdom. What do the citizens have to say?
I'm making mac and cheese, and nobody can stop!
When in Phin, do not disturb the townsfolk. They do not play nice. I guess I should have seen that coming, and thankfully you can still save on the overworld right before walking into that trap. Anyway, all of the NPCs here are captains that will personally hold reset and press the power button on your FamiCom for you if you ask them. There is a very easy solution here, just don't talk to anyone. All the stores are empty, except the pub on the edge of town. Ignore all the soldiers having a wild party and head behind the counter to the one NPC in town who doesn't want you destroyed. If you tell him your first keyword, Wild Rose, he will allow you to pass into the pub's cellar. And yes, I did just pass through a wall to reach the next room. That's not going to get old for the entire rest of the game, even when it's not plot relevant. In the basement is some gear as well as a dying soldier named Scott. He asks you to report back to Altea with some intelligence. His brother Gordon, who was above the rebel base, should have more faith in himself. The Duke Borgin betrayed the King of Phin and allowed the Empire to take charge, and to hold on to the engagement ring that was supposed to go to the leader of the rebel army, Hilda. For this era of consoles, this is really sad. In comparison to all of these action games otherwise on the system, like Contra or Mega Man, all of those games with overwhelming empires or military control or whatever have this last one standing feeling of desperation and the thrill of battle. But in Final Fantasy II, people are succumbing to the Empire. The only hero left is Hilda, and even she had to run away from Phin, bloodied and battered from the Empire. Hope is hard to find in this dark time. Bring your errand back to Altea after hopefully not running into the strong monsters next to Phin again. Gordon and Hilda express despair once they find that Scott has passed, and Firion offers the engagement ring to Hilda for her to keep, which she turns down. She then offers a second quest to your team, now recognizing you as strong warriors capable of traversing the landscape. That, or she doesn't have anyone strong left to fight. In order to get equipment for the rest of the rebel army, she enlists you to travel to the town of Salamondo to get some mithril. She gives you the name Joseph and asks you to take her right-hand man, Min, with you. Min gladly steps up and offers his canoe to your team. Min is the first temporary fourth party member. The three of the characters that you named at the beginning will stick with you through the entirety of the game, but the fourth slot will be traded between various characters. There will be a total of 5 different party members that will enter and leave your team throughout the game. Min is a white mage with all the white magic spells you could want. Don't depend on Min for physical damage. While staff users can make out well in physical damage, they pale in comparison to sharper weapons like swords and axes. He may also be lacking in health points when you get him, though really, you should probably have as much health as he has, unless you over-prepared. If you want to test what spells will be useful for you in the future, now is the time. You won't get another great chance to use these spells without spending a lot of money, not to mention time leveling them. The canoe is essential to progression, as the next few places are across a large lake and useful because there are no random encounters while in the canoe. If you use the encounters on the way to Phin to power up, you don't want to waste time with them. It's strange that you will want to avoid random encounters that might offer good experience and upgrades, but remember that it's still based on luck. Any benefits that you might earn from fighting random enemies may not come to you at all. Head northeast across the lake to reach a town not very far from Phin. If you're lucky, you can reach this town without having a single encounter. You may notice the ship parked outside of this town. The sailors are useful to you. This is one of 2 intermediary towns in the game. These towns are simply checkpoints for you to refill your resources before heading further to reach the end of a quest. If you've generated a good bit of cash, take a trip into the magic store to grab 2 spells, Blink and Shell. Blink increases evasion and Shell increases magic defense. Both are useful spells should you decide to have a mage. There is a man in town ferrying people back and forth to the next town, Poft. You can pay a small amount of money to hop onto his ship, but it's also possible for you to walk there. In fact, 3/4 of Final Fantasy II's locations are accessible by foot travel. The map is deceptively small. If you don't have the pocket change lying around to give the ferryman, you could take a couple minutes just to walk to Poft. Right away, you're taken to the second intermediary town in the game. This one, though, has a lot more travel options for you to choose from. There is an airship parked outside of this town, owned by Sid. Sid offers 4 different locations for an airship ride, with each location costing more depending on how far away each is. He offers a ride to Salamondo for 200 gil, which you can just pay if you have plenty of money. Salamondo is not far from Poft. If you walk northwest, you can probably get there in 2 to 3 encounters. The only location worth paying Sid for is probably Kashuon, but you don't need to go there right now. Poft itself is basically the same as Palm. It even sells the same stuff. Just before you leave, make sure to pick up the keyword airship from Sid. Don't forget to talk to all of the NPCs just in case you need to grab a keyword, because if you miss the keyword, the backtracking to find your one character will drive you crazy. So skip the ride and head to the mountain range. You'll be in this town at least twice for 2 upcoming dungeons, including the first one in the game. Armor here is stronger than the armor than you started the game with, so this will be your first significant upgrade if you didn't bother to buy the bronze armor in Poft or Palm. Your man, Joseph, is in the northeastern part of town. All of the men and Joseph's daughter were taken from Salamondo to mine mithril for the Empire. Now that you're a bit more powerful and have Min on your team, it's up to you to take them back. Before you leave, stop in the magic store. Warp and Life are extremely overpowered spells that you shouldn't leave without, especially Life. You can teach everyone in the party to revive the other members with magic, and it will save you so many times later. I wish I could say more about some of these towns, but they really don't have much going on in them. There are only a couple of towns that matter to you, and all of them have a bunch of developments. You'll be reporting back to Hilda and Altea, so you'll be back there often. Time to head west, above the waterfalls, and enter the Semite Mines, beginning the first dungeon in the game. The dungeons in Final Fantasy II are sometimes fun and sometimes not. This first dungeon is one of the fun ones. It all depends on if the dungeon is kept interesting with map design and enemies. Also, this groovy dungeon music. It's a good chiptune and it doesn't really get old by the end of the game. At least, I thought so. The Semite Mines isn't that much harder than the overworld, just now you're a bit starved for resources. If you're low on health, just have Min cast a defensive spell like Blink at the beginning of each fight to stay ahead. There are no enemies that are especially worrisome down here either. Most of the enemies have no vulnerabilities or resistances to any sort of magic, so you can use the time to whet your appetite with magic attacks, just to see which one works for you. Otherwise, one good sword hit should work for basically everything. Right off the bat, you should notice this weird blue rock next to the entrance. Ignore that for now, but make a mental note of it as you'll need it later. Most of this dungeon will be a straight walkway with a bunch of random encounters that you'll walk into. Most of the chests here have some gil for you to pick up, but it's not really enough. The enemy encounters also don't give enough for when you leave, even if there's a whole bunch of them, which, by the way, I should mention. Random encounters when you're not grinding actively are not worth your time. Eventually you get to a point where you have more money than you know what to do with, and have no need for any more extra stats. It happens with every dungeon. Eventually the encounters become useless to you and are just time wasters. If there was ever a game that needed an option to turn off encounters and have an auto-battle function, this would be the one. Think about it this way. Are enemies that you're on par with going to do enough damage for you to get more maximum health? And considering the length of this dungeon, are you going to use magic when you know you need to conserve it for the boss that comes later? Those are 2 questions that you should ask as you play each dungeon, because sometimes the answers change. I'd say the answer varies depending on the strengths of the extra member you have on board during each dungeon. Grab a little money from chests in this floor and head on down. On the second floor of the first dungeon of the game, you'll be introduced to another slap-in-the-face Final Fantasy II brings you on a silver platter. Trapped doors. Look, it's a dungeon, and yes, there will be traps of some sort, I get that, but I just explained that most encounters you run into when proceeding with the actual story of the game have zero purpose to you. So, if you choose the wrong door, congratulations! You now need to waste 30 seconds of your life trying to get out of the monster closet just to try again. I don't think this is good game design. You could open up a can of worms with this argument and say that all games should have some sort of punishment, and that video games should try to resemble real life as much as possible, but what boogeyman is going to wait thousands of years behind a rotting wooden door just to prank me? And I had to punish my characters just to get this far, just so they could be powerful. Anyway, that is not the last you'll be seeing of the trick doors. This is only the beginning. Feel lucky that all of the doors were next to each other, because usually all of the doors on the floor of the dungeon will be spread out. If you want to find the right door in that instance, first you have to fight the monster closet, then you have to fight a few more monsters on your way to the next door. And all of these encounters still don't provide enough for you to consider defending yourself. If you were going to do some training, why wouldn't you just do it with the powerful enemies near Phin? At this point, you could probably handle a tough fight with ogres and tortoises. Take the furthest door on the left to reach the staircase downwards. There are more trapdoors in this third basement, so this time take the door in the northwest corner of the floor. You may have noticed all these dungeon floors are square. Well, basically every single floor of any dungeon in the entire game fits into the same square. This might have been a way to manage memory for the cartridge, but it really hurts the map design of most dungeons. Make sure not to miss the chest directly south of the Basement 2 staircase. It has one gill in it. When you open the next door, you'll find all of the people who had been kidnapped from Salamondo, including Joseph's daughter Nellie. The great thief who only steals from the Empire, named Paul, is there to escort the poor human beings out of the Semite Mines. There are already a bunch of skeletons on the floor. Sorry for being 36 years late, but it's 2024 and I'm here now. Proceed into the fourth basement to find a single chest with a fire spell tome inside. I've been really negative about Final Fantasy II so far, with all of this talk about the combat system and the dungeon mapping. But, in comparison, this is something that I really liked. You can find tomes in dungeons, which can be especially useful if you're feeling underpowered and need a leg up. Sometimes it's not productive to teach all of the tomes you find to your characters. It's better if you don't waste the attack magic on your physical fighters because they don't need it. Keep them as free item weapons. Avoid the prank door and head down to the bottom basement. You can get an exit spell here, which is pretty good, but the main attraction is what comes along with the exit spell tome. This is the first instance of a forced chest encounter in the entire Final Fantasy series. You could say that the first game having forced encounter tiles in front of the chest counts, but I say that this is more par for the course. Guarding the exit tome is a tortoise, which if you accidentally wandered off of the beaten path while heading to Phin, probably backhanded you back to the file select screen. Magic attacks are great here, so if you don't need it, use the fire tome that you just picked up. It's annoying that you can't use your entire inventory while fighting, but then it might be too easy for your team to purchase instant KO spell tomes and just spam them. The boss of the dungeon is guarding the mithril in the next room, through the door southwest of the chest. The sergeant is a beefed up version of the soldiers that you've been fighting already, and deals quite a lot of damage in a single hit. Treat the sergeant the same way you treated the tortoise and you should be fine. Once you get the mithril, you can teach exit to someone on your team to get you out of there or walk all of the way out. Something to note about the spell exit though is that when a character uses it, they are severely damaged. This would be a really interesting trade-off if it didn't take one magic point to use exit and then I use someone else's magic to heal the user anyway. Then, it's just an annoyance. Now that you have the mithril, it's time to errand boy it back to Altea and give it to the rebel army. Hilda tells you to give the mithril to the blacksmith Tobal, so that he can make mithril equipment for you to use. She then tells you about the Empire's warship that is being built further east of Salamondo in the town of Bofsk. Time to get more powerful. Never mind. All of the mithril equipment costs a lot for how much money I have in my wallet. Why wouldn't they just lower the cost for the people fighting for them? Do the laws of supply and demand apply when the world is going to be engulfed in deadly hellspawn? What would Tobal even need the money for? What a cheapskate. You don't need it right now anyway. So that was useful for the rebels, and completely useless for your party. Whatever. Third quest time. If you blew all of your money on mithril armor, just keep walking east to reach Bofsk. Otherwise, Sid's airship will take you there. Here's something weird to consider. Final Fantasy II does not like it when you head to an area before you're supposed to. Before going to Salamondo, I actually came here using Sid's airship, and most of the NPC dialogue was filled with nothing. I guess that makes it easy to tell what town you're supposed to be in, but that's also plain weird. When you're in Bofsk at the right time, you find that the citizens are suffering under the might of the Duke Borghen. Borghen has been spoon-fed wealth in order to build the Empire's warship, which he has gladly enslaved the entire town of Bofsk to do. Even the soldiers are fed up with him. One of the citizens near the entrance to Bofsk says that you need a pass to get onto the warship, so bear this in mind. In the southwest corner of town, there is a soldier that is so fed up with Borghen's nonsense that he provides you with a secret passage to the warship when you ask about it. So, head into the corner to access the Bofsk Sewers. The Bofsk Sewers is the shortest dungeon in the game, with only 2 floors. The 3 treasure chests that are here are worth your time to grab, because they offer you a new sword and bow that you may not have had the money to grab beforehand. If you're looking for the most efficient route with all treasure and no dead ends, follow the right-hand wall, starting downwards. I don't even know if you can consider this a dungeon. It really doesn't feel like one at all. Even most of the enemies that appear in this dungeon also appear in the overworld, except maybe the balloon. There is a very low possibility that you will run into an enemy that can poison you, but that's really it. Bear in mind that poison is a temporary status effect in this game, unless you still have it outside of battle and your characters did not recover while fighting. Then, you get to hear this wonderful noise. Near the exit of the Bofsk Sewers, the Dark Knight is waiting. He tells you that he had been working on the warship this entire time, even though the citizens of Bofsk believed him gone. He leaves through the door, followed by Borghen, who basically just sticks his tongue out at you. Pursue them, and they leave with the warship. Does that mean that this entire dungeon was a bust? Not yet. Head back into the dungeon and into the room on the right. There is a warship pass in the chest and a teleporter out of the dungeon. That will be important much later. So that's that. Time to report back to Altea again. Honestly, I got annoyed by this back and forth nonsense. Hilda is basically using you as an errand boy. There's no transport out of Bofsk, so now a hike is in order. If you follow the warship to Poft, you find destruction in its wake. A lot of the NPCs are missing, and the pub is completely empty save for Sid and his partner. Back in the rebel base in Altea, you can talk to a whole bunch of people that had been displaced by the warship. These people are a good reference to find out where you need to go next, as their dialogue will update every time something big happens in the world. Without warning, the king's wounds deteriorate and Min leaves your party to ease his pain. What you don't know at this point though is that when Min leaves, he also takes all of the equipment that he had with him. I hope you didn't leave any valuable armor with him, because if you did, it's all gone for good now. This happens every time a 4th character leaves, and every single time it's hard to judge when they will leave with all of your stuff. And maybe you kept all the important equipment with your 3 musketeers, but what else is a huge concern right now? Money. All Min took with him could have earned you enough cash to buy mithril armor. Anyway, in order to destroy the warship, you need to find a way to harness the Sun Flame. Hilda tells you that her father's condition has stabilized, and that the Sun Flame is in Kashuon Castle, but it cannot be stored by any normal means. You're supposed to take this to mean that the king has information that you need, but I missed that and went all of the way to Kashuon for nothing. From this point on, read the dialogue between the lines, because the amount of people you can talk to is only going to increase, and only one of them will have the answers you're looking for. If you see a name, that's probably the name you need. The king says Kashuon was sealed before the Empire arrived, but that seal can be broken with another item called the Goddess Bell. Min then says that Gordon knows where the bell is. Hilda then tells you to talk to Joseph about the Goddess Bell, meaning that you have to take another trip to Salamondo. After being led around to a bunch of people that drip you information like medicine from an IV tube, you finally have an answer. Maybe Hilda didn't know that the Goddess Bell was some sort of key for the freaking place that we need, but I find that being leashed to the keyword system and then performing more errand work between people is irritating. If these people bothered to talk to each other, then at the very least you could first get all of the information you need in one go, and maybe second, send a messenger to my team so I don't have to cross a continent to get intel every time. And a reminder that encounters when you're traveling and not training are basically useless, especially since the enemies from Altea to Salamondo are still the weakest in the game and have no money to give you. Now walk all of the way back to Salamondo, in case you've been bleeding money to pay for Cid's airship rides in the sailing ship between Palm and Poft, to meet Joseph. When you ask Joseph about the Goddess Bell, he tells you that it's hidden in the mountains above Salamondo and that you need his hidden snowcraft to reach it. The snowcraft is hidden in the Semite Mines in a secret chamber on the beginning floor. He offers to take you to it. Joseph is the second temporary party member to join your team. He's a melee fighter who punches the crap out of everything. That is also a possible weapon option for all of your fighters, and it's a great choice as you're not limited to scrounging for weapons. It's also plenty powerful. Remember that one blue rock at the beginning of the Semite Mines? Well, now it's time for that rock to come in handy. It's supposed to be an indicator for the secret passage, but it really doesn't have anything to do with it. The real secret passage is in the top right corner above this blue rock. Joseph pushes a button and allows your characters to break the laws of physics and phase through the wall. In this area, there is a single chest holding the snowcraft. Now you can access the mountain range from the northwest. I recommend not playing Final Fantasy II in the dark, because if you've been used to the muted colors of the dungeons and houses, get ready to get flashbanged, because it's nothing but snow and rock all the way to the next dungeon. The encounter rate is lower than the snow area, at least. Sail the snowcraft as far northeast as you can, and you'll reach the Snow Cave. The Snow Cave is almost identical to the Semite Mines except that it's blue and white. I think most of the cave dungeons in this game are only distinguishable from each other by the color. If all of the cave floors were made black and white then put together, I would not be able to put the right floors together to make a dungeon. I went into a lot of detail with how the Semite Mines dungeon worked, because all of the cave dungeons work that way too. One passageway filled with some fake doors, maybe a side route for some treasure, usually flooded, and so on. Your party doesn't take any damage from being neck deep in icy water. I guess they're just better than that or something, I don't know. So, since the cave dungeons are so similar, I'll keep this section short. There are a few features to this dungeon which is arguably more than some later dungeons have to say. There's not much of note about the enemies of this dungeon, just that they give a little more money than the ones outside. The first interesting part of this dungeon is on the bottom floor. If you go to the southwestern corner of this floor, there is a trapped chest with an ancient sword in it. There is only one ancient sword in the game, but I would argue that it is the most useful sword in the entire game. I kept it in my item slots for Firion the entire rest of the game. Here's the thing with status effects. Most of the spells that you cast have some sort of element, and there are plenty of enemies that can resist that element. As time goes on, you will obtain armor that will allow you to become immune to status effects as well, but elemental resistances and weaknesses only apply to spells. If you have an effect tied to a weapon, then that effect is universal, resistance or not. This applies to the Ancient Sword because the Ancient Sword has the status effect called Curse tied to it. Even if the Ancient Sword has bad accuracy, the fact that it can inflict the Curse effect on enemies is devastating. The Curse status cuts the victim's defense in half. Now this might not sound amazing at first, just pretty good, but Final Fantasy II works off of a combat system with multiple hits. Defense is cut in half for all of the hits. If you hit an enemy 3 times, each hit dealing 10 damage, and the enemy's defense was chopped in half from 8 to 4, you're dealing 18 damage instead of 6. By cursing the enemy with the Ancient Sword, you can basically multiply your damage output by the amount of hits you do twice. This is how you collapse Final Fantasy II. There are bosses that are meant to be really tough and block all physical damage, but if you hit any of those bosses with the Ancient Sword, they will become like paper mache. It's unfair. What's also unfair to the enemies is that whoever uses the Ancient Sword can keep it in their item slot, and once the enemy is cursed, can switch back to a sword that does far more damage. Long story short, it's a keeper. The next interesting part of the Snow Cave is the room at the end of the 5th basement. You open the one real door into a waterlogged cave filled with beavers. They all say random things, but if you talk to the one in the northwest corner, Guy says, "I can understand him." Guy can apparently speak the beaver language. I didn't know beavers had a language. That's news to me. The beavers tell you to break the laws of physics again and phase through a wall on the right side of the room. In the next room, it's a short walkway to the boss of the Snow Cave, the Adamantoise. The boss is supposed to be tough, but you have the Ancient Sword by your side. Bear in mind that the Ancient Sword's effects do not stack, but they most certainly do enough for the Adamantoise's formidable armor to be broken. If you don't want to do that, you can always use the Ice spell to get the Adamantoise down. You earn the Goddess Bell and use the door next to the boss to get back to the first floor. Now that you have the Goddess Bell, you can unlock Kashuon Keep, and wait, hold on, there's another boss fight. Somehow Borgin managed to barge his way into the Snow Cave and wants to pick a fight with you. Borgin may be rich, but that's all he's got going for him. He can heal himself, but you can easily outdamage whatever healing he does. You just kind of beat him. But once Borgin is defeated, unequip Joseph immediately, because when you take 2 more steps down the stairs, this happens. Wow, that was unexpected. I really feel bad for the guy. That was sad. I'm not going to admonish the Final Fantasy II developers for trying to make a sad cutscene, because for the system, it's done well. But nowadays I found it funny. It was so completely out of the blue. One thing that should have been considered, though, is that the sad music is immediately cut off if anything else happens when it's playing. You only really hear it if you do some quiet introspection in its wake. I will say, though, that what the citizens of Salamondo have to say if you decide to bring the news of Joseph's passing to them is really sad. You have obtained the Goddess Bell, and are now 1 party member short again. The bell belongs to Kashuon Keep, and the 1 member left of the Kashuon Kingdom, Gordon, is nowhere to be found. Might as well move on without him. Use the airship to get dropped off in front of Kashuon Keep, and head inside. The design of Kashuon Keep seems like an experiment in what different ways there could be to mix up pathways in a square setting. It's not a bad dungeon, although it is restricted to those walkways and a few dead ends. Use the goddess bell on the door behind the sun flame to unlock the rest of the dungeon. In the stairwell leading to the rest of the dungeon, you find Gordon. How did he get inside? Are there 2 goddess bells? Couldn't he have gotten us inside? Did Joseph die for nothing? Is Gordon even on our side? And the biggest question of all, who cares? Well, whatever. Your cursed 4th party slot has now been filled for the 3rd time as Gordon joins your party. Everyone kept calling Gordon a coward, even himself, so it's about time he redeemed himself. Well, guess what? He sure joined the right party to redeem himself. He joined the Fight Club. He really is underpowered when he joins. The past couple dungeons provided enough money to get mithril armor, but Gordon is still rocking that bronze. His health is also way behind par. I mean, I did a lot of health grinding, but he's almost start of the game level. At this point, he may not be able to take a hit from anyone, unless you have Maria trained on a bow to shoot him. There are a lot of poisonous rats to fight on the way up. Poison still doesn't really have any consequence, rather than being annoying, and you should only depend on antidotes that you win from monsters. Speaking of which, the topic I'll talk about during Kashuon Keep will be monster drops. Getting items from monsters is not important right now because you don't need half of the things that they drop. There might be antidotes and eye drops, but those status effects will most likely cure themselves during battle. After the halfway point of the game, however, monster drops are awesome for you. That's when they start dropping armor and weapons. Some monsters have a % chance to drop an item after a battle has been won, in which case you can choose to put the item in your inventory or leave it. My advice is to leave most of the things that you find. It isn't until the very end of the game that monsters start dropping the best gear in the game, and any of the things that you pick up from these monsters is extra luggage. If you get lower level armor and weapons that what you have equipped, you can sell those for even more money. Don't prioritize making money over your inventory space. You'll get plenty from the encounters now that they give more than 2 cents. Back to the dungeon, you'll want to grab the gold gear in a couple of the chests. You may also get the Werebuster, which is a great staff for this section of the game. I think staff users got cheated out of being good, because staffs don't do a lot of melee damage, and despite their lowered magic penalty, you're better off leaving a mage barehanded. Staffs also cannot hit from the back row. Walking, encounter, walking, encounter, walking, try door, fake door, encounter, leave, walking, encounter, it goes on and on. The encounters are still minimally useful to fight right now, so this dungeon slowly becomes boring. At the end of the dungeon, you face the boss called the Red Soul. This boss is yet another reason why magic is just the wrong choice for Final Fantasy II. Magic attacks either don't work or heal the Red Soul, and the Red Soul will just spam elemental attacks. If you still have the Ancient Sword, you can make quick work of the Red Soul because that weapon's curse still penetrates the Red Soul's magic armor. For your toils, you receive the Egil Torch, which can pick up the Sun Flame. Now you have to walk all of the way back out of Kashuon Keep, that is, unless you kept the exit or warp spell handy. Once you reach the first floor again, you can collect the Sun Flame with the Egil Torch. It's here that you might notice something. You're beginning to build up a stock of key items. These key items cannot be sold or put in the trash. Once they've served their use, they just take up extra space in your inventory that you are getting close to full. I will talk about this later, when there are too many key items to handle. Notice also that the Egil Torch and the Sun Flame are 2 separate items, so that makes this problem even worse. After Kashuon Keep is finished, you walk outside and witness a chase. Well then, you can no longer get airship rides to anywhere. What a pain! You'll still have to walk back to Altea again. After so much pointless walking, it's time for even more pointless walking. I seriously wish you could just get teleported to Altea after a dungeon, because you already have all of the money you could get from fighting and looting in the dungeon, and unless you're grinding for stats, these battles have no point unless they sap you of your stats. It's really annoying. But, just this once, there is another solution. I don't know how in the world you would ever find this out, but if you head a little south of Kashuon to this forest square, you enter a secret area. It's time for the debut of a universal Final Fantasy mascot, the yellow ostrich called the Chocobo. In this little area filled with grass, the little chocobos poke their heads out randomly and you need to catch them. It's not hard to grab one, just remember that it is random. When you get your hands on a chocobo, the bird will wait for you on the overworld. Walk up to the chocobo and press A to get on it. While you're using the chocobo, you won't run into any encounters and can travel the world map at an accelerated pace. Just know that as soon as you get off a chocobo, you can't get back on without going back to catch a new one. I thought that the whole chocobo thing was really funny. The chocobo itself has a really goofy walk cycle that makes it seem like it's going far faster than it actually is. It also seems like the people riding on top of them are getting knocked around senselessly. The song also makes it seem that way, because the song is the definition of insanity. It's a 4-measure tune that will get stuck in your head if you listen to it for too long. Hopefully you can make it back to Altea in one piece. Once there, you find out that Princess Hilda has been captured by the Empire and was being held captive aboard the warship. Fortunately, the warship is parked forever for maintenance very far northwest of Altea. It's time for another hike, on foot this time. Remember that Sid was also captured, so you can't use his airship to cut the travel time. On the way, you'll fight some stronger enemies, including Big Bird from Sesame Street. If you can't beat these enemies, it may be in your interest to turn back and strengthen yourself before attempting the warship, because it does not get any easier. Before anything happens, make sure you have the warship pass from the Bofsk Sewers. If you don't, you'll have to fight a captain right at the entrance of the ship, and that went well last time at the beginning of the game. Not to mention that all of the NPCs walking around the warship also trigger a captain fight. Why did they even let you walk around the warship? Thank goodness for the pass. The first time I walked onto this ship, I got kicked out by a lot of walking landmines. My current power was not going to cut it, so I embarked on the second longest training session of my playthrough. Indication of whether you're good enough for a dungeon is usually fine for this game, though I think it could be better since your team's strength almost entirely depends on you spending time training. So, I'll do you a favor and skip all of the time I spent preparing to storm the warship. I was now ready to tank the damage from the landmines, although I couldn't quite take them out in a single hit. The enemies here go from barely relevant to near endgame material. The treasure that you can get in the warship is very worth the little side routes to achieve, even if the treasure is useful in specific situations. This is one of the first instances of a room only accessible by a fake wall. These will not get old anytime soon either. Be careful though, as the second chest from the right in the row of 4 chests on the 4th floor is trapped with a Hill Gygus. This will also not be the last time that a chest is trapped with a boss without any indication beforehand. The Hill Gygus is extremely difficult to beat without using the Ancient Sword. It's an enemy with too much health, too much defense, and too much damage for what you can handle right now. If it hits you, it will have whatever character it hits for breakfast. It's better to know that the Gygus is there, because if you accidentally walk into that fight, you'll probably lose. Beating it rewards you the Ice Shield, which is honestly a small upgrade not worth fighting the Gygus for. You have 2 objectives on the warship. Save Hilda and Sid from the holding cells and throw the Sun Flame into the engine. Hilda and Sid are located on the 2nd floor, and you need to go to the northeastern door on the 1st floor to get there. They're locked in a cell which you need to find a way into. Well, guess what? I don't need no key, I'm just gonna rip the iron bars apart. The rest of the warship is mostly walking, followed with fighting the same things over and over. As cool as the warship seemed at the start, it's still just another dungeon like the rest. It also falls victim to the same issues that the last dungeons did. The engine of the warship is all of the way at the bottom. First you need to pass this maze room with a bunch of captains at the corners. And no, when you try to fight the captains, they don't leave if you beat them. You could use this opportunity to get equipment from the captain's loot table, but I was lacking power to get rid of the captains easily, so I decided to skip it. You get down to the engine and throw the sun flame into it. The warship starts exploding and the Dark Knight comes down to the engine room to stop you, but far too late. Maria says that the Dark Knight's voice is familiar. Then comes the most epic escape cutscene ever conceived in gaming history. More story material awaits back in Altea, which Sid drives you to in his airship that was miraculously outside of the warship. The king's health is failing him, and the time has come for him to give you his final requests. Gordon is made commander-in-chief of the rebel army in place of the king due to his actions in Kashuon. The king secondly instructs Min to break a forbidden seal, which we will learn later contains a powerful magic for our use. His third instructions are for your party to enlist the help of the survivors of Deist. The Deist kingdom is located on an island to the east and is the home of the Dragoons and the Wyverns. It was yet another victim of the growing empire. Then, the king asks you to look after Princess Hilda and is Thanos snapped away by his injuries. Gordon tells you that one of the Wyverns might still be alive in Deist, and it's up to you to find out. By the way, I hope you remembered to unequip Gordon before entering the king's room, because whatever you left on him is unobtainable now. Oops! To stop some confusion, every other translation of Final Fantasy II calls them Wyverns, but in this game they're called Hiryus. I think this is a literal translation, but I'm going to call them Wyverns as a concession to remain consistent with the rest of the Final Fantasy series. I'm not going to mince any words. All of the 4 jobs that the king instructed his army to do are basically your jobs now. In fact, everything that the king said basically lines up with the next 40% of the game. And you can probably guess that the last 10% will be confronting the Empire directly. Might as well get started on our quest backlog and find a way to Deist. Deist is an island in the northeastern quadrant of the map, and is one of the few places that are inaccessible by foot travel. You'll need to find a ship that can take you there, and luckily there is another ship parked next to Palm. The captain of the ship, named Layla, is next to the entrance of the town. She offers to take you to Deist for free. There's something that's actually free around here? That's suspicious. But you decide to get on the ship anyway. You sail south to the only exit out of the first area's ocean and transition to a cutscene with Layla. Her lackeys appear one by one and she tells you to stick 'em up. Yeah, that couldn't have possibly been real, especially since she offered it for free. Staying at the inn already requires you to mortgage your house. The pirates then attack you. What any normal human should know, however, is that this party of 3 has been part of the Fight Club for this entire journey. The pirates are of zero consequence to you, especially if you can handle the Hill Gygus and the warship. After backhanding all of the pirates off the ship, Layla concedes to you. I don't know why she then joins your fight against the Empire, but she does. Layla is the 4th temporary party member, and probably the most important of all. She not only gives you the ship, but is also the most dynamic fighter you get, and stays with you for a good while. If you picked up the gauche from the warship, put it in her left hand. She is a good knife fighter and depends on evasion. This is a good time to talk about dual wielding. I will say that dual wielding does not work as it's supposed to, but it has some nice applications. It also looks cool. When you attack with dual-wielded weapons, only the hit from the first weapon will count. This also means that if you have a weapon with a status effect tied to it, it will only work if it is the first weapon to hit the enemy. Dual wielding is still useful though, because you still gain the skill points from both weapons. If you ever wanted to train evasion, well, put 2 shields on one character and they'll dodge anything. Getting to Deist is weird because you have to navigate around the screen-wrapping map. Head straight south from the exit of the first area until you hit the Snow Mountain range, then follow that range to the east until you begin heading south. Deist is southeast of that corner. Along the way, you'll fight new sea monsters and eagles. The eagles are called Helldivers in other translations, which is only funny now because there's a game with the same name. These monsters take a good physical hit or two to go down, and Layla might perish a few times on the way to Deist. How is she able to navigate the seas if the general fish was enough to take her out? But that's no problem anymore. Layla has joined the Fight Club. Keep this in mind, if a character is too weak to get hit by any of your other characters' attacks, you can always have them hit themselves. I don't condone this behavior, but I'm not the one that made the stats based on getting hurt either. She also knows some magic, and considering how long she'll be around, it may be useful for you to level her up as well. One last thing before Deist. Note that you can park your pirate ship basically anywhere. It's sometimes better to scout for a close spot to land so that you're not stuck fighting more land enemies. The encounter rate is higher on land than the sea. Deist Castle is completely empty except for a boy and his mom. There aren't even encounters here. There is, however, a whole bunch of treasure for you to grab. You'll get a winged sword, which you'll be stuck with for a very long time. I mean for like 6 more dungeons. The mom tells you that they are the last 2 human survivors and the last wyvern lies in the room next to them. You can't understand the wyvern as it is now, so you need the pendant key item to translate the speech for you. The pendant is worn by a skeleton in the Deist Cave to the north, but really, the only direction you're given to find the pendant is that it's somewhere nearby. Thanks, I guess? Head slightly north to the cave above the castle. You may run into another Hillgeigus on the way to the cave, but now that you have the winged sword, you can do far more damage. If you're lucky, the Gigas will drop giant gear that boosts your physical strength. It's a fabulous upgrade. This is the 3rd cave dungeon in the game, and it's no shorter than the rest, coming in at 5 floors. It's also basically identical to the rest. I think this was the point in Final Fantasy II where I started to get bored. You're infiltrating dungeons designed the same way, fighting enemies which still don't have much reason for you to fight them. If you're working on your own stats, maybe you can stay in a battle, but all of the grinding you do will probably have no reflection on what you're fighting. You could have done that outside of the cave and it would have made no difference. It's basically a glorified walking simulator. The pendant is down the northeastern stairs. You'll be back here in about 3 minutes, so don't worry about skipping anything. Back at the castle, the wyvern gives you an egg. It is the last wyvern, and the only way to save the wyverns is to take the egg to the Spring of Life, deep in the cave you were just in 10 seconds ago. Oh, whatever. Back to the cave I go. I'll spare you the cave because it really is just like the Semite Mines and the Snow Cave. The one good treasure here is the Mage Staff, which will probably be the first magic equipment you encounter in the game. This staff, when used as an item in battle, casts Bolt 5. It's okay, but only useful if you're fighting an enemy weak to lightning. You won't find many of those in this game at all. Another topic before getting a move on out of this dungeon is the resilience of the Empire. It seems that every time you put a dent in the Empire's plans, they subverted you and destroyed something else. During your foray into the Semite Mines, the Empire finished the construction of the Warship. During the Snow Cave and Kashuon Keep, the Empire used said warship to tear up civilization far and wide. It's a double-edged storytelling device. On one hand, the Empire is much bigger than accounted for, and the disappearing NPCs support that, but on the other hand, I feel like none of the quests you complete in this game have any point. You couldn't even buy the mithril armor after helping the rebel army get access to it. The topic of the Empire's great influence will come up later. For now, suddenly we're at the Spring of Life. Guarding the spring are chimeras, which have a strong fire spell that hits the entire party. They're not any harder than the hill gigases, which are common in this cave. Submerge the egg in the spring of life and warp out of the dungeon. While you were off doing that, the wyvern unfortunately succumbed to the poison in its body and passed away. Just in the nick of time, I suppose. Time to report back to Altea again. Fighting all of these monsters on the way is still pointless. The reason why I'm so irritated by the encounters is that you are losing stats with the more monsters that you fight. If you've been focusing on physical power, your intelligence is probably at a minimum. The opposite is true as well. There is 0 point to fight all of these monsters. Even getting the money is pointless now that you have enough to make ends meet. When you get back to Altea, all the soldiers say Hilda has been acting funny. She has been away from the rest of the rebel soldiers in her room. Make sure to unequip Layla before visiting. If you go to her room, she asks to talk to Firion alone. Your friends leave and the lights dim. Hello? Firion is like 14. There was a reason that the ESRB was invented. I don't care if this game came out before it could get rated M for mature, but this is happening. It's real. God help us.
FBI, open up!
Never mind, Hilda was being posed by a snake lady. Hand her a restraining order and get her out of here. Hilda has been captured for the second time and is being held at the Coliseum south of Kashuon.
Fine.
You're much better off sailing to the little forested area beneath the huge desert than walking there. Just park your ship as far above the Warship spot and below the desert, then head along the eastern border to reach the Coliseum. The enemies in the desert aren't that hard to beat. The Coliseum is a really short dungeon that thankfully gets straight to the point. You walk up to the center of the Coliseum and see the Emperor for the first time. After hearing about all of the desolation that the Emperor has caused, as well as all of the quests you've done to follow in his wake, there's some massive beef to work through. But the Emperor does not want a piece of you right now. In fact, the whole reason he captured Hilda was to measure you up and to entertain him. He's super egotistic. He basically says, "Dance for me," and the behemoth walks out of a cave to attack you. There is actually boss music in this game. Yes, the boss music is literally 40% through the game after fighting a bunch of bosses, but it exists, and it's pretty good. Not that the boss you fight deserves it any more than the other quote-unquote bosses you fought. I think the boss music is somehow tied to the enemy you're fighting because you may have noticed that the bosses of FF4 have become normal enemies. For example, the Adamantoids in the Snow Cave became a normal enemy in Deist. The behemoth is nothing to worry about. Slap it with the ancient sword and you've already won. The gate to the Emperor opens, but before you can do anything to him, you're captured by the Dark Knight. You sit in prison for a long sentence of about 40 seconds before the thief from the beginning of the game, Paul, breaks you out. He really wailed on that guard, like he hit him with the comic book sound effects. Hilda is being held on the floor below, and you need to fight a bunch more enemies to get to her. Before you go into her cell, though, unequip Gordon again. So unfortunately, Hilda and Gordon could not take you with them back to Altea, so instead you have to sail all of the way back there, while fighting even more encounters. I wish the Coliseum was just a boss fight, because this is just another dungeon. The thing about Final Fantasy II's story that I don't like is that it is barely broken up, and what it is, you're given more of the same content. The entire game so far has been going to a new location to play either a cave dungeon or a castle dungeon with no unique design, then coming back to Altea just to get sent out again. The only two things that change are the locale and the enemy strength. You just end up doing the same thing for the entire game. Even the one-time events are dungeons. It just gets dull. Back at Altea, you find out that the rebel army is now strong enough to advance on Phin. Hilda and Gordon have set up a tent outside of Phin where they ready themselves for an attack. Who am I even kidding? They're going to sit there while you attack. Whatever, I don't get paid enough anyway. Let's go. Layla is waiting for you at the entrance of Phin, and she joins your party again. I hope you didn't sell that good knife from the Warship, assuming Layla wouldn't be with your party again, because she's here. She'll be with your party for this dungeon and the next two. The encounters in Phin do not mess around. I recommend you just make a break for the boss room, because you can get all of the treasure later when the rebels occupy Phin Castle. Strength of the enemies was never the problem. The Hillgeiges can take more hits and deal more physical damage than anything in this castle, and that enemy is easily handled. No, the enemies in Phin Castle are devastating because they have access to all sorts of horrible spells. The three enemies I'm specifically referring to are the Spectre, the Death Flower, and the Wizard. The rest of the enemies have decent defense and damage, so they'll whittle you down while the magic casters do their work. The worst part about this is that these enemies have plenty access to spells that can cause a game over in a single turn. The Death Flower's hit causes confusion, which isn't so bad since most players may use the Fight Club method to raise their HP. The characters can take a couple hits from each other. With Firion and the Winged Sword, however, it gets dicey. Sometimes Firion can one-shot one of the party members. The Spectre is worse than the Death Flower because the Spectre can cast Break. Now, if one of your party members is petrified, that's okay, because you have access to Gold Needles or the Heal spell, assuming you level up the Heal spell to a point where it would be effective against petrification. But, I think that there isn't a single instance where an enemy casts a spell singularly. It's always group-wide. If a Spectre gets a turn off to use Break, then all 4 members of your party can get petrified and cause a game over. And if that wasn't bad enough, sometimes you'll run into massive groups of soldiers and wizards. This is probably the most dangerous encounter in the game for where you run into it. And I don't mean that endgame encounters aren't difficult, but this one is just unfair for how powerful you are when you attempt it. You better hope you get a preemptive strike and that, if there is one, then the wizard is in the front row. Wizards have a 20% chance of casting a group wipe spell, and a 40% chance to eat your health and magic points away. Look, I get it. It's cool to have all of the spells linked to battle in some way. The spell used to go back 1 floor in a dungeon can also be used to delete enemies from battle. But truly, honestly, I wouldn't consider that a game over. If Warp is used on you, then shouldn't the battle end with you on a different floor of the dungeon or something? When you use Warp, it doesn't just destroy you. How come being 1 floor down in the dungeon counts as a complete loss? It's not like the spell works any different for the enemies than it does for you, especially since the wizard is the #1 source of magical tome drops. So if you're going to have a utility spell in battle, make it perform the same function as it would outside of battle. But anyway, I had no idea how short the walk is up to the boss room. So, assuming that I would have to work through a giant dungeon with those enemies around every corner, I did some serious grinding. I even went back to Deist to get the giant equipment from the Hillgeiges up there. I was not messing around. This was also the time that I found out about the dance club exploit. I did that for quite a while, and I maxed out Firion's swordsmanship. And when I came back to claim Phin, I beat the living daylights out of the enemies. The captains and wizards, dangerous as they are, have some very useful loot to pick up. Wizards drop certain spell tomes, including Toad, which is the most accurate insta-win spell in the game. It is exactly as it sounds. You turn your enemies into toads, and they leave the battle. At the very least, if it happens to you, you can cure it with a Maiden's Kiss or a higher level heal spell. Just know that toads cannot cast magic. Gotus is waiting at the top of the castle. Phin had to be kept for the Empire by somebody. Fighting him is no problem, though he does have a buff item that he uses at the beginning of the battle to boost his attack power. Notice that the boss theme isn't playing, so you can guarantee that you'll run into him later. Take him out, and Phin is yours. Hilda and Gordon take Gotus' place, so now instead of completing quests and returning to Altea, you can return to Phin instead. Even if the Empire has suffered a heavy defeat at your hands, there is still more to do. Min has been out of communication for a long time, as the king sent him to break the seal on Ultima, so now you have to go check on him. Before leaving though, you need to finish the rest of Phin, as Hilda tells you that one of the keys to breaking Mysidia's seal is in the basement of the castle. Okay, so you sent Min to Mysidia to break the magic seal, but now you're telling us to go meet him with the magical mask that you just so happened to forget to give to him so he could break the magical seal? What the hell did you send him there for? If he can't do anything without the masks, then what is he doing there? He would have been a massive asset in raiding this castle because he could cast spells to stop the trolling from the wizards. Whatever. Hilda tells you that the entrance of the basement is hidden and requires the keyword Ekmet to open, but she doesn't know where it is. Maybe the townsfolk who came back to Phin know about it. At least one of the townsfolk gives you the funniest line in the game. This is a reference to what 50% of the NPCs say in the first game, and when I say 50%, I mean 50%. The thief, Paul, lives on the southwestern side of town, and he knows what the keyword is. He tells you to check the upper right corner. The upper right corner of what? This is a question that doesn't get answered by literally anyone. The upper right-hand corner of where? Well, it's a basement. It has to be on the castle ground floor, right? No, it's in the throne room. You get up to this nondescript wall in the northeastern corner of the throne room and yell Ekumet at it, and it turns off its collision. What the hell, man? That's crazy. On what planet would you know to mention it to Paul and then go try it in the throne room? If you think about the context of the story, of course Paul, being a thief and all, would know the ins and outs of the buildings in Phin, but seriously, that is a stretch. You walk down a whole bunch of stairs to the Phin Basement. Make sure to grab the treasure on the ground floor that is only accessible by a fake wall. I hope you were prepared for another dungeon, because there is another dungeon inside of Castle Phin, and it's 5 more floors. I don't think you could get any worse with the fake doors than here. The Phin Castle Basement Dungeon is the second most annoying castle dungeon in the game, as well as generic, with the multicolored floors being the only part that saves it from monotony. In the 4th basement, there is a blood sword, which is a very useful endgame item. It's not great now, but when you begin to run into enemies with thousands of health points, it will perform greatly. Each hit with the blood sword does 1/16 of the victim's total health. It can also hit multiple times, so keep it in your sword fighter's items. Other than that, grab the white mask and use the teleporter to leave Phin. You now have to either walk to Mysidia or sail there. It's basically the same travel time considering how far you have to sail to get there. Mysidia is a great town, especially since there are 5 wizards selling magic books for you to stock up on. It depends on how much you use magic through the game, really. Other than that, you need to head to the cave on the south side of Mysidia and place the white mask on the statue. Once you've done that, you can ask the residents for the next step. What's weird though is that the game clearly states that you place the white mask on the statue, but it's still in your inventory. It'll stay in your inventory until the end of the game. In fact, you still have the Warship pass, and that will be with you until the end of the game. You also still have the ice sled and the Egil torch, which you'll never need again. I mentioned this problem earlier in the game, but it's becoming a real issue right about now. You still have to hold on to the black mask and the crystal rod in order to break the magic seal. I think the only item that has left the inventory was the egg. Inventory space is becoming a precious quantity. And considering that the egg is gone, I think that the Final Fantasy II developers should have considered this. When you interact with certain things, you can use items in your inventory, but of course the egg is the only one that doesn't stay. I can understand some of that, like the Warship Pass being reused in case you leave that dungeon, but shouldn't there be an NPC after you've used the key item that takes your stuff or something? Anyway, the second mask is in a cave in the middle of the ocean. The island is directly south of Palm, but it's small so it can be easy to miss. Use Layla's ship once again to sail to the Black Mask Cave. I sincerely hope you like the color green. Like, I hope you absolutely love it to death, because if you don't, your eyes are going to suffer here. I think this dungeon is really lackluster, so much so that you could probably beat it if you come here right after obtaining the ship. The enemies here are not hard to beat. Despite the new theme, it's the same cave design as all the other cave dungeons before it. I stopped playing for a little while during this dungeon because I was so bored. There is one thing in this dungeon. If you take a certain pathway through this dungeon, you can reach a town full of the slime enemies that you've been fighting. If you switch to using a spear at any point in the game, you can grab the demon spear from the shop here, but otherwise, it's not worth your time. This dungeon was definitely for a weaker party, because the boss is not even tough enough to survive one hit. Get the black mask and leave before your eyes explode. That's one side quest down. The third item to break the seal is located southeast of Mysidia around the big mountain range. It may be worth doing both of these dungeons in one shot because this one was too easy. Guess what? It's time for another cave dungeon. The only two things that make this cave stand out from the rest are the NPC next to the entrance and the many fake walls. Other than that, it's still boring. The enemies in here are harder than the ones in the Black Mask cave, but after handling Phin, this should be no issue. You need to put the Black Mask from the last dungeon on the doppelganger guarding the Mysidian Cave in order to proceed. I don't know how you would have known that, but whatever. So, this makes a little more sense. You only need one item to break the seal, and the two masks to break the spells guarding this special item. There is a rampant overusage of fake doors in this dungeon. This is getting out of hand. Like, really. What is the point of these? Are they here just to waste more time? Because that's what they do, and monster encounters are still not useful to fight. Don't leave this dungeon without grabbing the ice bow. Even if you have a bow user that's been backroad because they don't do enough damage, the ice bow is enough to put the user on par with sword users. The ice bow is super overpowered. But anyway, I don't want to spend any longer in this dungeon than I need to. I've spent quite a long time talking about other things in the midst of other dungeons, but this one is just annoying. Get the crystal rod and warp out. While warping out, think about this. Why do the stairwells count as extra floors so you have to warp out twice as much? As for my answer, I have no idea. Now that you have the crystal rod, you can enter the Mysidian Tower. If you sailed to Mysidia and anchored your ship off of the south coast, you'll need to sail back to Altea and head west into an inlet. Before you enter the mountain range surrounding the Mysidian Tower, unequip Layla. Remember that all of the times a temporary party member leaves your party, it's basically unexpected. Such is true of this time, because this happens. Alright, so the tsunami that hit your ship was actually a giant sea monster that ate you, and Layla is probably gone for good. In light of that, you finally arrived at the part of Final Fantasy II where it gets fun again. The Leviathan dungeon is actually designed fine enough, and 2 of the 3 floors resemble a giant eel of sorts. It's genuinely new and interesting. Make sure to pick up the Gaea sword too, since it's the first sword upgrade in a long time. There is even acid on the floor that you have to wade through to get anywhere. You walk through the acid up a set of stairs and find an entire village inside of the Leviathan. Blocking the way through the village is Richard the sword-wielding dragoon. This man is probably the most down-to-earth character in the game. He is the father of the family in Deist and has been searching for Ultima on his own when he also got eaten by the Leviathan. But he's down to earth because of his responses to your prompts. I've been to Mysidia. Who are you people? What happened to the dragoons? He's a character that finally isn't just a questmonger who tells you what to do. The people inside of the Leviathan have lost hope of getting out, and tell you that there is a ship at the tip of the Leviathan's mouth guarded by a monster. So, you recruit Richard as your 5th and final temporary party member and head to confront the worm. Roundworms are a common endgame enemy that will probably tear you apart if you can't beat them quickly. They have 2,000 health, so if you can't damage them, consider using a status effect sword. Once the roundworm is defeated, you can take the ship to leave the Leviathan. You also leave literally everyone else in the Leviathan. The only person that got rescued was Richard. I guess the party has better things to do than saving people? After refueling if you need it, the quest to obtain Ultima still awaits, so continue past the Leviathan's lair to reach the Mysidian Tower. It's either this dungeon or the final dungeon that is my favorite in the entire game. I like the aesthetic of both a lot. It took so much just to get here, especially considering the 2 caves where I just wanted to stop playing entirely. This is the payoff for slogging through the 3 past dungeons. Even the music wants to spice it up, which I greatly appreciate. As useless as the encounters are, at the very least this dungeon offers some interesting challenge. I mean, physical power still wins every time, but now you can use physical power on something actually tough. That, and the enemies here are elementally diverse. The 10 floors of the Mysidian Tower are elementally themed, with mini bosses to stand in your way between some of the floors. This isn't designed like the other boring castle dungeons either, even if one of its floors has the most fake doors in the game. The floors feel like a biome was ported into the castle floors, which is fun to explore. The treasure in the Mysidian Tower is exceptional. Don't miss the chest hidden behind the walls on the north end of the first floor, because there is a white robe in there. The white robe is the last armor your mage should need for the ending of the game, not to mention all of the new armor and weapons you pick up halfway through the dungeon. The ice sword is so far above the wing sword that it's unfair. The elemental armors also provide your first elemental resistances in the game, though it will take a lot more armor than that to prevent the execution spells. I'm having fun. I guess I'll open this treasure chest too, on the 9th floor. After that happens, you can go up to the 10th floor where Min is waiting. Now this one I have even more of a problem with than I did with Gordon getting into Kashuon. Do you know what I had to go through to get to this freaking castle? I had to play 3 of the most insufferable video game dungeons known to man, and you think that you can just ignore that? What the hell were the last 4 hours for anyway? Min is standing in front of the magical seal guarding Ultima. He tells you to stand back and watch him focus his power on the door. So, I want an answer now. The crystal rod, which we were specifically sent to get from the Mysidian Cave after dealing with like 4 extra dungeons, was supposed to break that seal. Why? Why did Min do that? We have the freaking key to the door. We could have just unlocked it, but no! Min had to be a hero and fight the impossible door. This makes no sense. Also, the sad music is once again circumvented by entering a door. Inside the Ultima room, there are 5 spheres arranged in an X shape. The 4 spheres on the outside give you stat boosts, and the 5th one in the middle gives you an Ultima tome. Congratulations! You just obtained one of the most useless spells in the game. Now, why would Ultima be useless? Let's think about this. It actually comes from a disagreement from Final Fantasy II's programmer and director. The programmer had the idea that Ultima should not be a good spell because it pales in comparison to the might of magic today. The director did not like this idea and tried to fix the code so that Ultima would be powerful again. But this programmer was not messing around. He ciphered the code so that it could only be understood by him. And that's why Ultima is the way it is today. The funniest thing? He did not get fired and proceeded with the next Final Fantasy game. Let's go back to Altea and fuel up. Oh dear, what happened? Did I do that? Did Ultima do that? If Min did that, then I would understand why it took his life. Hilda has the answer back in Phin, which is the only town that didn't get destroyed. Also, Layla somehow survived. Neat. So the Emperor has harnessed the power of Mother Nature and has created an unbeatable hurricane that he has steered around the entire world map to destroy basically everything. You just arrived in time for the hurricane to come to Phin, but you still have a chance to stop it. How can we get into the hurricane? Remember back in Deist when the Wyvern handed over that egg? The time has come for the hatchling Wyvern to save the day. While you don't actually have to sail all the way to Deist to get the egg, I think the way you get the egg back is completely unindicated. If you explore Phin Castle after beating Godus, you may remember that there was a mirror in the side room. Well, if you use the Dragoon's pendant on the mirror, you see the egg that you placed in the Spring of Life. The egg hatches, the Wyvern comes through the mirror, and enters your inventory. Now there is a way. But how on earth would you have ever found any of this out? I have zero idea where that came from. But maybe I'm a bit salty after doing the entirety of Mysidia just to find out that Ultima is not nearly as good as it was cracked up to be. Whatever. Fly me to the moon, and into the Cyclone. Question. If you use the Wyvern to fly into the eye of the Cyclone, why would you land at the bottom of the Cyclone? Why wouldn't you try to land on the floating palace at the top of it? It's gotta be magically suspended in the air somehow. Not only that, but you don't take the Wyvern into the storm's eye. By flying the Wyvern into the storm, you end up at the bottom of the wall of the Cyclone. The Cyclone is actually another dungeon. The overall map design is really good and really bad. The Ascending Cyclone, where the dungeon expands from the bottom, is an awesome idea and is evident by the increasing size of the dungeon floors as you near the Emperor's seat on the top. But to get there, you need to weave through a whole bunch of different passageways, not to mention a certain staircase that leads to a room with all fake doors. Can you tell that Final Fantasy II is irritating me? Maybe. Enemies in the Cyclone are tough. They all have quite a bit of defense, especially the Golem. The treasure is fine. If you haven't been finding diamond gear already, you'll find it here. That and a new knife. The Emperor is sitting nicely at the top of the Cyclone, which is somehow unaffected by the strong winds below. You come to fight him, and he's not strong at all. In fact, you can probably one-shot him. For someone that was able to conjure a massive typhoon and wipe out basically the entire rest of the map, he doesn't hold up well in battle. Even the spells he can cast increases comparatively weak physical power to moderate physical power. Keep this in mind. Spells used to increase physical strength will not stack on each other, rather than use the most powerful version of that spell casted. After defeating the Emperor, you leave the castle and are granted an epic victory dance with all of your allies.
Help me! Help me!
So, the game is in fact not over. The Emperor may be gone, but Leon has taken his place. Apparently, Leon's worldview was warped by the Emperor, and now he has a Darwinistic view of the world, where might makes right. Firion tells Gordon that they will take care of him, which is really ominous. Weren't they basically adopted brothers? And his biological sister Maria is on the team. But you do find out that the only way to access Paramekia Castle is to fly in. You could use the Wyvern, but the game doesn't feel like it. So head to Paul's house, where you find a heavily injured Sid. Apparently he was unable to escape the Cyclone on his airship, and spent the rest of his good health fixing the airship, which he gives to you. Then he also becomes a victim of Thanos. Paul tells you that the airship was Sid's magnum opus, and that he trusts you will carry out your mission. It's time to take on the big bad for the second time for the last time. At this point, the airship is nearly useless to you because all the other places besides Phin and dungeons were demolished. The only new place that you can go is Paramekia Castle next to the Coliseum to the east. Land on the top towers of the castle to get in. Now that's finally using your brain. Wondering what castle dungeon earned the most boring award? It's this one. I have not seen a more infuriating set of long-reaching pathways in an RPG except for Duncan's Factory and Mother. Have you noticed that basically every castle looks the same? Well, now you're in a castle, but yellow. How's that? And after all of that hard thinking that maybe I should land at the top because I want to confront my enemy as soon as possible, goes out the window on the floor you land on because the first thing you do is fall all of the way down. I think this is some sort of sign that you're not allowed to be smart when approaching these dungeons. But now you have to walk all of the way back up to where you were just to get to the Dark Knight. Along the way, you'll fight generals, which are super buffed versions of captains, and the knights riding horses from the beginning of the game. There are also a good bit of enemies that can confuse your party, which is especially dangerous now since your fighting characters can probably one-shot the others. I don't even want to talk about this dungeon. It was so much more of the same. At least you can get the Sun Sword by doing a massive side path. Climb all of the way back up to the 7th floor where you dropped in and head up to the throne room. So in real life, I guess that most American forts and medieval-era castles in Europe may look the same, and are built out of the same stone. That may be an excuse to have all the castles look the same, but this is a video game fantasy world with magic in it. It's supposed to be fun, but wait, I forgot I'm playing Final Fantasy II. Quick thing, unequip Richard. The Dark Knight, or Leon now, confronts Firion and Maria. This is going to be the most epic battle in the game, and maybe actually difficult. I know I grinded a whole bunch, but leave me alone, I didn't want to do it later. And I'm actually excited to see what happens and what's happening. This egotistical, maniacal jerk beat the devil and clawed his way out of hell to prank you. And then we lose the most based character in the game, the man who had no idea what was going on but came along for the ride anyway. Well, crap. The game has now had 2 fake endings, and there's a zombie on the throne. Leon gets revenge in his head and designs to join you in your quest to beat the Emperor. The gang is finally back together ever since the beginning of the game, and Leon may not be on the other characters' level, but he's strong enough to survive the final 2 dungeons. Question though, after falling all of the way down into Paramekia Castle, why couldn't the Wyvern fly you back up? The Wyvern is literally in your inventory. What was it doing otherwise? And it flies you out of Paramekia. I have some serious salt with Castle Paramekia, really. The leaders of the rebels tell you that there is a way to get inside the hellish new castle because flying won't do it now. There is a large swath of land to the east of Mysidia on the Jade Sea, and in that land there is a small portal to hell. Guess that there's only one way forwards. Equip your characters to the best of your ability, attempt to clear out your inventory even though it won't work, and you'll find a little pond that has formed where Layla said it would. Beyond this point is nothing but legends and myths. Where you enter that portal, you leave the world of reason behind. No pressure. There is one last thing before you descend dimensions. You should break the news of Richard's appearance and passing to his wife. She is saddened by the news, but before moving away from Deist, she gives you the ultimate treasure of the Dragoons, the Excalibur. Okay, I'm going to attempt a level with this one. All of the Dragoons were gone. She may not have been able to trust you when you were there for the first time, but when you helped the Wyvern and proved yourself worthy, couldn't she have given us the Excalibur a bit sooner? Don't you think that would have helped avenge your people? It's just like Ultima, except this sword actually works. That's basically the only side quest in the game, completed for being a kind person. Whatever, time for hell. Bon voyage. Well, the Emperor said it was time to make the world a living hell, so it's time to see what his so-called hell looks like. By walking into the Jade Portal, you are transported right into it. Just know that on original hardware, there is nowhere to save beyond this point. It's either right next to the portal on the overworld, or not at all. I really like this area. This may not have been expected, but it seems like some sort of forest sanctuary. Not at all like hell. However, I think that the Jade Passage is modeled after the first level of Dante's Inferno, called Limbo. If you're not familiar with Dante's Inferno, know that in that 12th century Italian poem there is a full tour of Hell. Hell is described as having 9 levels based on different sins, with Limbo being the first and largest level. It's meant to be deceptively peaceful. This is a timely reminder that Final Fantasy II is a video game for the FamiCom and had a lot of ambition. I won't strike this one down. Anyway, there are entirely new enemies to find here, and being so near the end of the game, they have a lot of damage to give. Far worse than just damage, though, are the absolute messes of status effects the enemies can bestow upon you at any moment. The Great Mole Boar is probably the worst normal enemy in the game for this reason. If you can't get rid of it before it attacks someone, you're going to be royally screwed. A single hit from the Great Mole Boar inflicts 6 status effects: paralysis, sleep, confuse, mini, mute, and poison. It's not related to a special attack, so it'll go through any sort of armor. Either use evasion or something powerful to take them out before they ruin your run. That's just the overview for a single enemy. That's probably the most dangerous enemy in terms of status effects, but it is far from the most damaging enemy down here. You can expect any of the chest bosses from previous dungeons to be in high demand here, especially dragons. The Jade Passage only half suffers from bad cave design disease. The first, second, and fourth basements have trouble with it because of a bunch of fake doors in the same looking generic cave room, but the other 3 floors are some of the best in the game. I really like the waterfall floor, even if it has a few fake doors too. It drops the top-down view in favor of the continued descent, and I really like the fact that the waterfall hurts you. That might sound strange, but the fact that the waterfall hurts you implies that you're not walking in normal water. It's deceptive, as it's supposed to be. There is also a last-minute magic store behind the waterfall on the bottom of that floor. This store sells Berserk and Haste, which if you haven't gotten them from wizards are worth it. Just make sure to level them up using the Dance Club method because they're not great at level 1. Berserk increases attack power and Haste increases the amount of hits a character can do. When highly leveled, they're far too broken for this game. Make sure you're looting the Jade Passage too. There are plenty of final weapons which culminate your journey in a single weapon. There's the Yoichi Bow, the Rune Axe, the Holy Lance, and more. You'll need it to survive further on. The last couple floors of the Jade Passage have a sense of finality, what with the thin cliffs that your characters traverse above the rest of Hell. The final floor is a climb up a cursed mountain, which teleports you into the final dungeon. If you made it this far, you better have elixirs or ethers or something to get your magic back. If you can't cure off the sheer amount of damage you'll receive from individual encounters in this dungeon, you need to warp out and start over. The enemies in here are even worse than they were in the Jade Passage. The Square A-Team had to be saving a good fourth of the cartridge for this final dungeon because there is not a single dungeon in the entire game that received this much care and attention, save for the Mysidian Tower. All floors have tiers and special routing. They may still be walking simulators with a whole bunch of encounters, but there are two things that are saving this finale from the same problems that the other dungeons had. The enemy encounters actually do matter in this dungeon because of their loot and their difficulty, and the walking isn't just straight paths anymore, it's mixed up between a bunch of structures. It's also kind of maze-like, which is at the very least different. The first 3 floors of Pandaemonium are nice to you, actually. They're straightforward. The 4th floor onwards, though, they're just brutal. Let's just say that you'll be hearing the boss music chime in every other battle now. The 4th floor is 3 floors long. You're given 4 doors that lead to different parts of 2 different rooms, and you need to find the correct pathway in those 2 rooms. To keep it interesting, though, there are pieces of extremely heavy-duty Genji armor hidden in chests in the rooms, which are each guarded by unique bosses, including the devil himself. Yeah, you don't get to fight the Emperor yet. You gotta go through this guy and then Astaroth first. You can also run into the giant super boss, which will smack your party members silly if you can't beat it. Just like the other enemies, it drops fantastic loot, including another Excalibur and more Genji armor. You could just keep fighting them and find Genji armor for everyone, and then just be invincible. The real treasure of these 2 rooms is through the leftmost door. If you follow it all the way to the end, you'll find a single white pillar. But if you take it a bit further and walk through one of these walls near the pillar, you're transported to a very small room with a single chest in it. In this chest is the Mazmune. If you lay hands on this sword, you've already won the battle. This sword opens the gate for a sword user to leave whatever conceptions of maximum damage you may have had behind. It's far and away the best weapon in the game. If you don't have a sword user, give it to Leon, because Leon came with a bunch of weapon skills already. If the Mazmune's attack power isn't enough, try using it as an item in battle. It casts Haste 11. That's 11 more hits. The Yoichi bow casts a high-level Berserk too, so if you put those together, you might be able to hit the damage cap of 9,999 damage. The correct door of the 4 is the second from the right. Follow that to the end and you reach a teleporter. Now you're in the final stretch of the game. At this point, there really aren't treasures worth getting. It's just a race to the finish. Hopefully you haven't run out of resources yet, because there's still 4 floors left. The 5th floor is straightforwards, and the 6th contains a whole bunch of stairwells that don't make sense. I think this fact indicates that the closer you get to the Emperor, the more reality warps around you. The 7th and second to last floor in the game is a giant gallery of statues. Don't spend too long wandering around this room or you might get attacked by a landslide of bosses and lose right there. If you head directly southwest, you'll find the final teleporter. The final floor of this dungeon is devoid of everything. You're surrounded by stars. There are still enemies in this room, though I think there shouldn't have been. Nothing should be able to get this close to the Emperor but us. Heal up to the best of your ability. I saved 4 elixirs all this way to this point so I could be at my best before fighting him. The Emperor is responsible for the death of Richard and Sid, as well as countless other lives wiped out both by the Paramekian Hellspawn and the Cyclone. He commands a wealth of magical prowess capable of rending countries apart. Atop the ruins of old Paramekia, he built his opus, of which you had to struggle through just to meet face to face. It's time for one of the most difficult and costly battles of your life. Just kidding, the Emperor is a joke. I wouldn't waste your time preparing all the resources in the world for you to survive this fight. If you even use 1 debuff on the Emperor, or 1 buff on yourself, it becomes unfair. Maybe the Emperor would be hard if you tried to just wing it with weapons, but at this point in the game, why would you do that? You already had to deal with a bunch of other enemies that were much more worthy of spending magic spells on, and upon hearing the Emperor, you'd think that you would need to be at your absolute best to take him on. But no, you really don't. Here are 3 strategies to beating the Emperor with 0 effort. If you have been keeping the blood swords in your inventory this entire time, now is your chance to make them useful if you haven't been using them already. The enemies in Pandaemonium have thousands of hit points, so you may have been using them. The Emperor has 10,000 HP, yet using the 2 blood swords you can still end this fight in 8 turns or less. Equip Firion and Leon with the blood swords, have Guy or Maria cast Shell 4+ on the party, and you've practically won. Suppose you also grab the Mazmune on the west side of the 4th floor. It might not seem to do much, but consider using buff spells such as Berserk or Haste. You don't even need to grind to level those up anyway. If you have the Mazmoon and Yoichi's bow, just give both of those things to Furion and have him cast the spells hidden on those items. The Mazmoon also casts party-wide. You will quickly demolish the Emperor. The Emperor has really high defense, and you may find it hard to land an effective blow. It's also incredibly difficult to land a status magic spell on him, such as Curse. But remember, some weapons have attack effects tied to them that can just bypass magic defenses entirely. The Ancient Sword can cut the Emperor's defense in half. If you then switch to the Mazmoon or another powerful weapon, you can get hits worth thousands of damage. In this way, I beat the Emperor in 5 turns. All 3 of those strategies involve melee weapons, but you could also use some casting items you may have saved up until this point. The only effective damage spell is Flare, which still isn't great. However, if you maxed it out and use a Sage Wisdom during the fight, you'll cut him down easy. Any of the support casting items are good to bring along. Hate to say it, but what a disappointment. After defeating the Emperor, the party comes together to celebrate peace once and for all. Leon leaves to re-evaluate himself, and everyone's happy. The ending is also a bit too fast for my liking. There's only one part that stuck with me, and that's this. It's oddly sad to see that. Frankly, after coming this far through the entire game, there really has been quite a lot that has happened. I think that, in the last chapter, Final Fantasy II exceeded itself. In this quick part of the video, I want to talk about the differences between Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy II. The Final Fantasy games are almost entirely different in the series, so they're hard to compare closely. Instead, I want to highlight some things that I thought were general improvements and retcons. It goes without saying that there will be major spoilers for both games here, so skip ahead to the final review of Final Fantasy II if you are interested in playing Final Fantasy I blind. Cutscenes are better, not that Final Fantasy I really had any cutscenes if that final scene with Garland counts. The water in the ocean actually moves. The battle screen is better because it's not nearly as restricted. Sound effects for character hits and magic is better. Animations for magic are good. New magic spells such as Curse, Toad, and Ultima are good. You can rearrange your inventory. You can rearrange your magic spells. Indication is quite a bit better instead of talking to random people. Set encounters are now predictable. Ethers and Phoenix Downs are now available for purchase. There is now a one-size-fits-all shelter. Nothing in your inventory stacks. Inventory space is shared with armor, weapons, and key items, so you actually lose inventory space in general as the game goes on, instead of just armor and weapons. The Final Fantasy I magic charge system, while not great, is still better than the Final Fantasy II grinding. The ending of Final Fantasy I is more satisfying, and the final boss better. There are 3 repeating dungeon themes in Final Fantasy I instead of the 2 in Final Fantasy II. There is an unused dungeon track in Final Fantasy II which could have made it into one of the castles, at least I think so. I won't knock the Chocobo themes of later games, but I will knock this one for being repetitive. Keeping to intended areas. In Final Fantasy I, you'll enter a new area only after acquiring a vehicle capable of passing through said area, and by then you'll be powerful enough to defeat the enemies there. In Final Fantasy II, you just game over from new enemies to get redirected. You don't lose stats in Final Fantasy I. The sound design is as good as it ever was, but this time is especially interesting because it's not cheerful. It's very unique for the system. The overworld theme describes the word drifting. It's a better soundtrack than before. What hurts this one's rating though is that there is an extreme lack of variety. This may have been because the game's point was changed in development, proven by the happy themes present in the game's memory that went completely unused. I think that this sad theme was important though, because the bleak atmosphere of this game would be used to catapult future entries into worldwide fame. The unused dungeon theme is even repurposed in Final Fantasy VI. Walking back and forth to Altea does not make the world seem bigger than it actually is. The Final Fantasy II world is pretty small, actually. It's not so terrible if the world changes every now and then, but it doesn't. There's a whole bunch of dungeons packed into a single area, then you're done there, so you never head back. It also gets some extra points knocked off for how the world design affected the gameplay. There's no way of knowing if you'll walk into a battle that's too powerful for you to handle depending on where you are in the world. You're not really allowed to explore unless you put a whole lot more time into the game, which may ruin first impressions. Not to mention, of course, that some areas such as the Mysidian Cave and Semite Mines are specifically located in hard-to-reach inland areas, so that you have to do a big hike to get there. And, as I have been stating this entire review, the encounters are not helpful in the slightest. You don't get enough money, then later you don't need any money. Final Fantasy II's textures could use more work. The enemies are completely fine, and I especially like the design of the dragons. I think that the enemy sprites have remained in good quality. Points taken off here for rushing though. Firion looks absolutely nothing like his in-game sprite, and that is evident in any other version of the game. The same goes for Guy. That's just a recolored sprite from the first game. Firion's trademark white hair definitely was possible, as evidenced by Min and Gordon, but it just didn't happen. Not to mention he stole from the fighter of Final Fantasy I anyway. The story of Final Fantasy II is pretty darn good for the NES era. The intimidation of the Emperor is done well, and I really like that the world dynamically changes based on what the Emperor does to it. Seeing all of the towns demolished due to the Cyclone was shocking. It's just that there are some semantics that butcher important parts of the story. For example, I mentioned a couple times that certain sad moments get completely cut off by a transition in the game, so they don't really have any impact. The few cutscenes that there are in Final Fantasy II are also victim to this, as the instant battle transitions or other game mechanics get in the way. The only character loss that felt particularly meaningful was Cid's, and that's because you need to watch him struggle to his bed. I think that, regardless of the technology available, the idea was there and there was a disconnect between what could have been and what was put in the game. But the worst part is that characters popping in and out of the story really didn't have meaning anyway, because none of the characters have any real personality. I think Leon, Cid, and Richard may have been the only characters that weren't directly roped into the group collective that was the Rebel Army. When the rebels lost someone, everyone would feel the same minimal way. The party literally watches Min give his life to break the magical seal in the Mysidian Tower, and 10 seconds later they're stepping over his corpse. So, really, the time had not yet come for a deep story. I think that I went over why the gameplay was frustrating several dozen times during this review, but I'll sum it up here. It's monotonous. The only time the gameplay is fun is when you're fighting a boss. Otherwise, you're grinding, attempting to progress in a dungeon and getting interrupted by encounters that have a negative impact on your characters, and walking endlessly. You could make the argument that the entire RPG genre consists of walking through dungeons and poking random encounters with weapons endlessly, but there is a method to that madness that makes it fun. It's the fact that each fight in a different game would be handled completely differently than others. It's the joy of the unknown. But in Final Fantasy II, you already know what you're getting into, especially when all of the dungeons are the same. In fact, the combat is pretty much the same throughout the entire game. Fight the tough enemies in an area, grind, fight more tough enemies, and so on. Once you've played the Semite Mines dungeon, you've played them all. For a long-form game like this, it's abysmal. For something like Super Mario Bros. Or Pac-Man that you only play for at max half an hour, it works just fine. And even those games have something different going on for them for each playthrough. That is probably the reason why so many people can't get into Final Fantasy II.